I do think that my main media, it's actually the exhibition space itself. And my artwork is not so much site specific, but I do work with the exhibition space. And when I exhibit the new space, I like to understand the exhibition venue. I'd like to understand it visually and to figure out what's the best story that I can fill it up with. I'm not so much interested in the history of it. And that is because with my art, I do try to kind of take away the history part of the space of my artwork. I call this dehistoricization. It's contextualizing the references I'm using for my artwork. And with this, maybe up to a certain level, the exhibition's venue as well. When everything is about information, you go online and you find so much stuff, rubbish and everything. You don't know where it's from. You find an image and it might be coming from a totally different space that you thought it would be. And it's just a jungle of information. And it's sometimes nice to find stuff online which is decontextualized. You don't know where it comes from and you approach it a different way, like a naive person, like a kid. And this is what I'm trying to do with my art, creating objects that might have function, but you don't know what it is. And this is what I'm trying to create within the space. Hi, I'm Adrian Kiss, and you are listening to the Parcours Sonore at the Institute of the Present. But currently I'm in a stage of change, I think. Well, I'm trying to be. In the last 8-10 years, I was experimenting. I was looking for my identity, trying to figure out what I like, who am I, and I just figured it's always changing, and you don't need to be strict on that. So in the last couple of months, maybe 2 years, I've reached a plateau in my practice, but I've managed to overcome it with some help from my partner. And I think I kind of opened a small door and realized what I want to do in my practice, which is still working with objects and materials, but looking at how they can become time-based. And this is important because in my personal life, I was affected by the fact that I couldn't find my identity in my professional life. So I was making art that I didn't felt it was connecting to me personally as much. It was just objects which I liked. Maybe they worked, maybe they didn't, but I never felt very personally connected to them. But recently I did create objects and artworks which I felt like, yes, that's truly me, and I want to really go towards that direction. And that's why I moved to Rotterdam recently and started a Masters of Fine Art course at the Pitsvaart Institute, because I'm looking for critical support from my peers and tutors from the institution to help me build up this foundation for my new direction in my practice. My work, it is tactile, and the fact that I'm working with surfaces, but they are all in a way structures and objects, and the fact that I'm trying to create bodies with every single piece of mine. So all of my works are kind of figurative or just fragments of our human body, because I'm influenced by design. Just because I want to get closer, understand the materials I'm using, design, it's always a relation between materials and the human body. It's a really good way for me to research how could I better create shapes and materials. And with this, I'm creating objects and surfaces which I have heavily influenced by human parts or just male and female body in general. They might have a specific gender, these objects, even though gender is a social construct. I'm using fashion, say inspiration or automotive design. And when I look at these inspirations that I find, they might be visual images from the internet or just found objects, vases, cars on the street, or tools. I'm looking on their shape. I'm looking at, are these functional? Do they correlate to certain body parts? How are we holding them? And somehow I digest this information and reappropriate it and put it in my work. Now with the quilts I make, It's not so different from the structure of this. It's actually the same. It's just two-dimensional. And with quilts, I create these abstract, in a way, tribal masks. It's a collection of lines which I'm finding interesting from specific industrial design parts, segments that I look at. And I collect these images, these ideas, and eventually I start working with them. In June, I had an exhibition opening at Vunu, which is a gallery in Košice, Slovakia. And at Vunu, I prepared a body of work which was influenced strongly by rural object culture, so by objects which I found at my grandmother's place, which are maybe heavily used, and materials as well in the countryside in Hungary. And I was interested in creating objects that were inspired by these materials and objects. So my artworks, they were creating a installation within Vunu space. This space at Vunu was a former swimming pool. So yeah, it feels really enclosed, even though it's still an open space. But the walls and the floor, it's concrete. And I think it gives a perfect frame for anything you put in there. So everything looks good visually. And I figured this location would work really well as the stage. So I built a scenery, like a theater stage for a play, with my new artworks. And what was new about the way I made them was the way I was using materials. I tried to use stuff that was around me, stuff that was ready-made, and disintegrate that, take it apart, like leather jackets. So I was constantly influenced by leather jackets in my previous work, but this time I just bought a bike leather jacket from a second-hand shop, and I took it apart and I turned it inside out, and I was working with the materials within the jacket. Whereas in the previous years, I might have tried to recreate a jacket, and by using those new, fresh stuff which I made. So that would have been my process, clinically clean, like a product coming out from a factory. But this time I thought I'll just use stuff laying around me, stuff which is influencing me, and not pick materials which are too direct, I guess, for my practice. The new direction in my practice, which might not be so new, is just something I want to work with in the future. It's the performativity of the objects. How can they be performative? How can an object be a performance on its own? These objects, they change with time. They rust, they oxidize, they change shape, the color changes. But at the same time, it's the viewer who changes as well. So if I find an object buried in the ground, which was in the ground for 10,000 of years, I might not understand what the object is, because myself and our culture, we change so much, we are not able to depict the function of it. So these are the two levels I'd like to play with. One is the object changing, the other one is the audience changing, and this happens parallelly. There's a relation between them, so I like to create objects which are in a way fictional. We don't know what it is for, but there is a story behind it and we're not able to tell it. Maybe I'll work with stories, and maybe I'll create stories around the fact that these objects had a previous function. And for materials, they do change with time. I had a textile piece, and Boris Solai and we wanted to create this artwork for a specific exhibition, which was evolving around this very topic of performance. And she asked me to create a piece of artwork. We put this textile piece on the terrace of Trafo, and we left it there. I think it was 2020, February, the beginning, just one day before all of the institutions closed because of COVID. We didn't know they're going to close. And we wanted to leave it there for half a year, see what happens. It was white, quilted, 2 meter high, 1 meter wide textile piece, which was hanging from metal structure. It had little pieces of metal parts which were added to the fabric. And during these 6 months, we wanted to see, we were interested in how is it going to look by the end of it, what's going to change. And luckily, the art institutions and COVID, luckily or unluckily, made us leave the piece there for a year and a half, because in 6 months, nothing really changed. It took a year and a half for it to completely change, take a new shape. And this was one of my first experiments in how can I leave the making of the artwork to some other conditions, like the weather. And it was photo documented before and after. Maybe in the future, I might use moving image or audio or some other recording device or medium to record it, because it's really interesting to see how it changes. I do big stuff because I really want to create immersive pieces, and I think if the artwork is bigger in size than the audience, it just has a different impact. You have a different relation to it. So that's why I make big stuff in general. But it's not me who actually makes it most of the time. I work with a group of people who are more talented than me in welding, in sewing, creating patterns. And my job is to create these designs for the artwork, to figure out how I want them to be understood by the audience. And then the second part is communicating these ideas with the pattern maker who has the technical ability to create them. I want to work with so many mediums, technologies, that I won't be able to learn all of them. So I just work with people who are talented in their own field, and that's really satisfying, because communicating, leading a team, it's something I've realized later on in my life that I like to do that. And so far, it worked really well. It's difficult to make somebody understand what do you want to make, because it has an emotional side as well. It's not just the object, like how do you want it to look like, the size, material, etc. But I feel like they need to understand what's it for, what does it mean, what kind of emotions I want the artwork to potentially express. And by getting closer to the person I work with, I have a better chance of creating an artwork that succeeds. For me, at least, because everybody sees these pieces differently. But there are pieces which I make myself, which they don't require like high technical skills, only my hands and my ability to take stuff apart and then rearrange it. And when I do that, I enjoy the fact that I can be a child again and work intuitively. So I love to use clay for this. I like to create assemblages of materials that I dissect and then reconstruct an object out of it. That's something which is really interesting for me. And I think there might be a personal reason why I'm not keen on making the work for myself, and that is I started my art career as a painter, but painting for me was very free, and I felt lost in the world of painting. You could do whatever you wanted to do, but I just couldn't, because I didn't have the technical ability to do that, and I was very frustrated by the fact that I had ideas and I couldn't make them. Eventually everything looked good by the end, but it wasn't nearly close to what I wanted it to be. So this is how my journey started, my journey of outsourcing and working with a team. And I'm actually really proud of that. It's not something which I'm trying to hide. It's something that I worship, the fact that I make connections, and all of the people who worked on the works we created, I think their signature is somehow embedded in the work. Even though they followed certain instructions, unintentionally, they altered the piece itself. And sometimes I'm not giving very specific intentions because I'm curious how they would do. I'm not sure if this is a copyright infringement or how should this be stated at an exhibition, but it's something which I like to do, to work with team. And yeah, this is what I've been doing so far. And humor is something I love to work with, but it's so difficult to do stuff which is humorous, but then it's not cliche or not something that it's too direct. So I think I'll just have to evolve a little bit more with my artwork to figure out how can I make stuff that's got this element of humor. Well, I'm not an optimistic person. and I don't see the world going towards the right direction. So I don't really think of the future that much. My work might be creating this dystopian world of a future-like civilization. But it's actually a depiction of today. It's not the future. But I don't think much of the future. I think I live more in the past and in the everyday problems because it gets me going. I like to have habits which I rotate every few months, like what I eat in the morning and what I eat at night. I change it every, 6 months. I like to eat the same thing every day for breakfast, and maybe change it slightly. So some of the ingredients, they do change. But this is as far as I look in the future, let's say 6 months. I don't want to know what I'm going to be doing in 20 years because I don't want to be there. I'm super afraid of death, and I'm afraid of losing my ability to do what I'm doing now. It's not just, the disappearing of identity, but the fact that I won't be able to lift my artwork, which is 100 kilograms in 40 years. I still want to do it, and I don't want to think of the fact that that's something which I might not be able to. So at the moment, I'm just closing that off, but I have to open it soon to work on it, probably. Being born in Romania, I lived there 8 years when I was a child, and then with my parents, we moved to Hungary to find, better living conditions. And after 8 years of living in Budapest, we moved to London, where I finished my high school. I did my BA degree at St. Martin's. I studied fine art. And I'm in this constant flux of changing my social foundation and background. And being so much with other nationalities, I kind of forgot my mother tongue. It's just really passive because I'm not really using it. I'm speaking sometimes with my parents. But if you forget your mother tongue, it's like leaving home in a way. You cannot find those roots as easily as you want it to. So home is probably wherever I feel comfortable with my friends. I don't feel like I need to pick a place. This is actually a very sensitive topic for me. The fact that you have to label yourself. Either, you have to be a citizen of a country, or you have to have your favorite music, or you have to put labels on yourself, or you need to have a specific gender, she, he, they. It's nice if you can be fluid and let go of these roots up to a specific healthy level. My mom lives in England. She moved from London to a smaller town. So that's one of my hometowns. Budapest, it's a hometown of me. I love it to bits. It's a really nice place. And when I go back to Harghita, Bolan, that's a hometown as well. The postmodernism architecture from Miercurea, the mountains and the forests at my grandmother's place, and just hearing the wind blowing through the forest is like so strong. My favorite year of the year is when the spring storm they come, and it's not that cold, but it's so powerful to see all these thunders, and I just love it. It brings back the joy of my childhood, which is a strong influence in my practice, in my art practice.